Hello guys and welcome back to the SimpliCode programming channel. This is Vikesh and let's get started with today's topic, which is about encapsulation. So again, let's understand what is encapsulation in general and then we will apply that concept to Java. Encapsulation, if you try to break that word, if I just write it here in the form of a comment, it's encapsulation. Just trying to break this word into to make it more visual. So you see a word called capsule here. So if you try to imagine a capsule, why do you create that and what's the concept of a capsule? Capsule tries to pack a lot of things inside a small tube-like shape. And the concept of encapsulation is sort of inspired from that. Not exactly, not literally, but that's the basic idea of this root word, which is called encapsulation. So encapsulation basically means to restrict accessing the properties of a class to the outside world. If you want to protect the properties of your class, how do you do that? You do that with the help of the concept called encapsulation. So here this is a sort of a security feature. You can think of it as a security feature that you want to protect the properties of your class, and you will use encapsulation to protect the properties. How you implement encapsulation? Let's have a look at that now. So basic idea is to encapsulate the objects, create sort of a capsule around the object which can provide that protection layer. And you will define how the outside world is going to access the properties of the class if needed. So I've created a simple class here, and it's if you remember one of the previous examples when we discussed about classes, I used the same class, which was the student class, and I'm just using the same class for continuity. So I've created a student class here, and I have created three different properties of this particular class, which is name of the student, age of the student, and address of the student. You see, intentionally, I have used the keyword private in front of these three properties. And that is the first thing which you need to do to implement encapsulation on your object, that you hide all the properties from the outside world. Remember, the moment you make anything as private, only the class, which is the student class itself, only the class itself can see these variables or these properties. Nothing outside the student class will be able to access the name or age or the address directly from the student class. It's not possible. That's the whole idea of making it private, because you don't want the outside world to access these properties. So you make those properties as private. Then you create a constructor. The constructor has to be public so that anybody can initialize the student object, because you want your object to be accessible. Remember, so you want the objects to be accessible, but you want the restriction on the access of the properties of the object. And these are the properties of the object. So you have restricted them by making it private, but that doesn't solve the problem, because there will be some illegitimate consumers of the student object which should not have access to the student properties, but there will also be some legitimate consumers of the student object which should be having access to the properties of the student. For example, the payroll application will need access to these particular properties. The examination application will require access to these particular properties. So how do you do that? You create getters. We call them getters because they start with the keyword get. So you create a getter method for each of the property. You create the method called as get name, and this is the naming convention which Java promotes, that you write get and then you write the name of the property in camel case. So you write get name, and this property is supposed to return the name property of this particular object. And here you say return name. So you're returning the name which is being stored by the current student object whenever somebody calls student object dot get name. And this is the way you have restricted the access of this particular object as well. So remember, you made it private so that nobody can access it. And then you defined your own way of providing access to the name property of this particular class. Now, if anybody wants to access the name value of your student object, there's only one way to do that, which is via calling get name. So you have provided restrictions and you have also provided prescriptive guidance on how you are going to expose the properties of your class. That's the second thing which you need to do to implement correct form of encapsulation on your object. That is to provide the getter methods with the right visibility. You want to make them public so that anybody can call them, but since you are governing which is what is written inside the method, you have full control on what kind of exposure you want to give for this particular property. Similarly, you create a getter for age, calling getAge, which returns the age, and then you write getAddress and return the address. Here it is simply returning it, but if you want to do more stuff here, feel free to do that. Like I said, you govern the control of how do you want to return the name. Maybe you don't want to return the complete name and you want to just return the initials. Then you can split the string, trim the string, and return only the initials. So that's the basic idea of getters. Now, after you have created the object, there might be use cases where somebody needs to overwrite the values of the properties like name, age, or address. What if a student's name was incorrectly mentioned when they called the constructor and now they want to overwrite the name or fix the name? So basically they have to replace the existing value of the name with a new name. So in that case, you need to provide what we call as setters, and they start with set. That's why we call them setters. And we follow the same kind of logic that you provide the setters for all the properties of your class. So you had three properties, which were name, age, and address, and you provided the setters for all three of them. And how do you provide that? You again make them as public because you want the outside world to access this setter method to override the values of the name. This method is not going to return anything, so it is going to be void. Then you write the name of the method, which starts with set, and then the property name in camel case. And then you provide the new value, which is the value which should be the new value, and this is the value which should replace the existing value. So whatever new value you want to supply, you supply that as the argument of the setter methods for set name, for set age, or for set address. And then you write this particular line, which says set the current name property of this particular object with the name which is coming in from the argument. So this dot name, remember, this dot name represents the current object's property because this represents the current object. So whatever is the current object property value of the name is, just override that value with the argument coming in. Do the same thing for age in set age method and do the same thing for set address in the set address method. So this is how you are going to provide the setters and the getters. So setters and getters can also be generated in smart IDEs like Eclipse. So you just right click, you go to source, and here you will see the option of generate getters and setters. If you click on this, it will give you the list of the fields which are available to be having getters and setters. Currently, it says no fields or all fields have getters and setters already. Yes, because they have it. Let me just comment this and show this how this works. So for example, let me comment all the getters and setters. So I'm commenting them. And if I right click, source, generate getters and setters, I get all the fields available for which setters and getters can be generated. So you can select them and leave everything as default, hit generate. And it is automatically going to generate the getter and the setter. You see, all the code of the getter and setter is automatically generated. You do not even need to write it. And this is the power of the smart IDEs. Let me just revert what I did. So you created everything as all the properties as private, and then you define how you want to replace the values by providing the setters, and you define how you want the outside world to access your properties. So you have full control of the class now. You control the visibility, you control how they are going to get initialized, you are controlling how the properties are going to be overwritten or set, and you control how the properties are going to be returned. So you have complete control of the class. So you have created a perfect capsule here, a perfect form of encapsulation in this class. And this is how you can implement encapsulation. And that's all I'm going to cover for this particular session. In the next session, we are going to discuss about abstraction. If you like this video, a thumbs up would be massively appreciated. and please do not forget to subscribe to SimpliCode for more programming related videos. Thank you, and we'll meet again in the next session.